this is Gilgamesh. I'm going to review Nosferratu. This was the 1922 film. This is the cast. This was Max Schreck. Just to let you know, he was not originally going to play the character. The actor who starred as Caesar in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was originally going to play him, but because he was busy, couldn't, so they brought in Max Schreck. Well, here's a funny thing. When he got cast, they made him up. The crew, the other actors didn't know this, but when they brought him in, they made him up. So when they first see him, he looks exactly like Count Olaf. And and this is true, they tell everyone he's a vampire, and Max Schreck only goes around playing as if he's really a real-life vampire for the movie. And this was what they promoted. They said, you will see the first ever real-life vampire die in a movie. So when they kill Count Olaf off at the end of the movie, the director went around telling people, yes, we actually had a real-life vampire in our movie, and we killed him off. Kind of made nobody want to see it. The movie flopped initially. But his look, Count Olaf's look here, is based a lot closer to the death bird of the plague, because you got to look at, the Spanish flu had hit in 1918 to 1920. When they started filming this movie, it was in, I'd probably say 1921, so about a year after the flu, what you would call the plague had finished. Rats were known to carry it, so that's why Olaf looks the way he does in the movie. He has the teeth of rat, his long claws, his emaciated bald head, his sort of pointy ears, all to make you think of the rat, the plague. Yeah, and so people would think of the death bird. And so that's why his look is such. And the writer of this is Henrik Galen, and he didn't get the rights to Bram Stoker's Dracula, so what he did was he altered the book and everything, and he changed the Dracula to Count Olaf, and the cast, like, look, Ellen is, all these characters are completely changed from the Dracula to what they are in here. And and he also took it from a love story, because that's what Dracula was ultimately. It was a love story. Basically, Count Dracula's wife had died, and he cursed his, and basically when he sees Jonathan Harker's, sees Nina, he basically thinks she's his reincarnated wife, so that's why he goes and, ultimately he decides to go to London so he can try to convince her that she's his wife, and he come back to Transylvania and live with him in his castle. So that's technically what a love story. This movie does none of that. They changed it, and they wanted this to be about the plague because it had happened. And so, and the characters, they changed the name. Like, he is not Renfield. He's actually Hale Nook. Yeah. And by the way, the writer himself is Jewish, and the actor who played Nook is also Jewish, and he had to leave Germany when Hitler was put in power. So all the actors are German, and they change it to this fictional town in the movie from London to what's the name of the town? I'm trying to find it. It's some made-up name. They just came up with a fictional town for him to come to in Germany. And, And Max Schreck really carries this movie. His presence, he doesn't say one, it's the whole idea of his facial expressions and his movements. And that's a hard when you have to look at the way he moves in the movie. It's sort of like this stilted move and his shadow and everything. And and there's no dialogue, so you're dealing with actors who are showing their facial, and like at the beginning of the movie, they're all happy and everything's great. When we get to Transylvania, Carpathia Mountains, where Olaf lives, this is where when Thomas cuts his finger, he meets the Count. At first, you're like, is that the Count? Because he's on his coach. He's covered his head, and you don't see his claws, and you don't see his teeth or anything. And he kind of tells him get in the carriage. And he takes him back to the castle, and he walks in the door. And he meets him. He's standing there in his castle, and he's got the keys, and he doesn't look anything like he will later, when he And at dinner, he accidentally cuts his finger, like he doesn't know how to cut bread, so he cuts his finger, and the Count goes, and basically, he also sees Ellen, Thomas's wife, and he's like obsessed with her, and he's like, so he wants to get to her, and so when Jonathan cuts his thumb, he eventually wakes up, and he laughs off these 2 marks on his neck. The Count bit him on and then he sees him when he goes and looks and finds he finds his coffin, and in it he sees that he's a vampire, and then later he sees him and he's got the claws out, and he's looking for him, and eventually Jonathan escapes, and he heads back, trying to beat the Count back to his hometown of Wisborg, I think it's called in the movie. It's not a real town, and Ellen keeps, she's worried about her husband. She has some connection to the Count, but we don't know what that is. And essentially, when he gets to and Nock is just crazy, and he strangles a guard at the hospital and escapes, and he runs around like a lunatic, and he laughs hysterically, and they throw things at him, and eventually when the Count does get there, he's on a boat, and basically people start dying, and they go, oh my God, the plague has hit the boat. People are, and they don't know what's going on. Eventually one of the crew members realizes something down below is killing everyone. So he goes down there and he breaks open the coffin. He goes to break the coffin, and that's when the Count basically lifts himself up, and he goes, and he gets killed. And the captain basically ties himself to the wheel because he's gonna get it in, and gets there, and they get on the boat, and they see the captain's dead, and there's rats everywhere because rats bring the plague, and then suddenly people are dying because his evil presence brings the plague. And Ellen realizes that her husband's in a hospital, he's been rescued, and she realized the only way, and she can feel the Count's presence. He's in the town, and he knows where she can see him, and she tells people look, it's him, and they don't listen to her, they don't believe anything she says. The professor, I forgot about what he does. He's not called Professor Von Helsing. I know they're putting that here, but he isn't called Professor Von. He's, like in the 2024, he has a different name, and eventually Ellen realizes she has to kill him. And this is where the woman in this movie, and in the 1979 and in the new one, is that the woman is the heroine of the story that is the only one that can stop this monster. So she basically lets him in. He starts, bites her in the neck and starts drinking her blood, and then he hears the rooster because the sun's up, and she keeps him to the point that when he finally does try to get out, the sun's up, he dies. But her husband gets in there after he's turned into smoke and ashes, and then she says something, she embraces her husband and then dies. So Ellen sacrificed herself to kill Olok. And Max Schreck's so great that you actually see this is when you see him in the movie, it's like he's terrified. And like I said, he's supposed to resemble a rat. Well, the thing about this was Bram Stoker's widow sued to try to get all the prints of the movie destroyed, and she couldn't. And they didn't have permission to the author, the guy who wrote the screenplay, didn't have permission, but he had changed things to the point that it wasn't the same story, and it hasn't been. I mean, look at that. This is him at the end of the movie. Look at that shadow. It's terrifying. So, yeah. And Max Schreck, they said, they promoted as, we have a real vampire. We killed a real vampire. The movie failed at first. Now it's a cult classic. It's really, it's because of Max Schreck's performances count Olak, and he's had a long career. So they try to say he had a long career, and I've seen this movie over 100 times. And so, yeah, it still holds up as it's better than Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is more menacing and terrifying than that. So yeah, I wanted to cover this real quick. So yeah, this is Gilgamesh. I will talk to you later. Bye.